All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Take care of something real quick, and then we'll start answering some questions here. If you got, go ahead and post them below the video. If you're on a smaller screen, larger screen, it's going to be to the right of the video. All right. Thanks for being patient there. Okay. You zoom in here. All right, so first question here is from Keith R. It says, Q, I have a divot board and have been practicing waist-high pitch shots, but like most of my friends here in upstate New York, I have 8-foot ceilings. Do you have any other drills I could do? I mean, you can really do the top speed golf system in your house. You can just choke up on the club. So instead of holding the club at the end of the club, right, you just have the club right here and do the system, right? Do the system like that. And then what's also cool about this is if you choke the club up down here, right, it will kind of tell you if you're releasing the club early, right? Because it'll smack you in the side, right? So if you come in and you practice swing and you smack yourself, right, then you know you're releasing the club early. So we can kind of feel it kind of going out away from you here, right? So you can just choke up on the club and go through the system that way. That's really what I would recommend. You can always practice putting indoors. Get a putting mat like this, works through the top speed golf putting system, chip ping pong balls around the house. The possibilities are really endless for what you can work on. So you just got to be creative with it, and doing something is way better than doing nothing. So just get after it and choke up on the club or whatever you got to do. So Jeff J says, my putting backswing takeaway is all over the place. Tip for steadiness. Well, one thing I would recommend doing is probably loosen up the grip a little bit. Sounds like you may be, for a putting stroke, we don't need to have a really firm grip on the putter, right? So you may have a really firm grip on the putter, which may be causing that. I would also make sure that the putters the arms are kind of hanging down, right? If the arms are hanging if you're putting with the ball way out in front of you, that may be causing as well. So let the arms kind of hang down, so that way you can just use the shoulders to go back and forth. If you're using your hands a lot, that could be part of it as well. So make sure that you're using the shoulders, right? Your lats to do the putting stroke. So it's hard to say exactly why, but that's what I'd be looking at. Your grip, the how much force you're putting into the handle of your grip, and your lats. You can also do kind of like a gait kind of drill. So actually, this is one of my favorite putting aids, putting training aids or putting trainer kind of things. It's a putting mirror, so it allows you to have a consistent setup, which I think is very, very important for putting. So that way you can kind of see the line the same way all the time. If you're setting up if you kind of gradually, because a lot of times this happens, and it happens to me in my experience where my setup will gradually change. It's not like it suddenly changes one day, but a lot of times it gradually changes, and then I just start seeing the line. It just eventually it changes by whatever, a certain percentage every time, and then over time it adds up to a large percentage, right, where it's off, and then suddenly you feel like, oh man, everything's just off. Right. And then I jump on one of these things and I say, oh, okay, well, I usually have my eyes lined up in a certain area, and now they're over here. And now that's why I'm seeing things a little differently, where my shoulders got way too far open or too closed or something like that. So using a putting mirror is a really good way to check your setup and to make sure that you're set up over the ball the same way very consistently. So whenever I practice putting, I always use this guy. So the other thing that I really like about it is it shows the track of the putter. And that could be also what's going on, is you may not be letting the putter naturally go around your body. A lot of times when I see people have that kind of noodle stroke, the spaghetti noodle stroke that you're talking about, they're trying to take the putter straight back and straight through, but that's not how the putter naturally moves. You have to manipulate the putter to do that, and that might be where some of that shakiness is coming in. So this training aid shows, or this putting trainer shows, the natural arc of the putter. It arcs. I don't know if you can see that, but it's a slight arc, right, where it comes back, because that's how it works around your body. So using something like this, and it's got these little holes in it, which if you use it outside, you can put tees in, and it can kind of help guide the putter. It can tell you, okay, you're bringing it too far inside, too far outside. You know, you're manipulating it. It will tell you, hey, okay, are you manipulating it or not? So doing a drill with this would be very beneficial. Really helps you to get a steady setup and things like that as well. So this is called Back to Basics, but any good putting mirror is typically going to have these kinds of gates here. So, but Back to Basics, it's the number 2, not TO, but the number 2. Back to Basics Golf is where you get that. I don't think they're super expensive. I don't have any affiliation with them. I'm just a happy customer. So check them out. Good putting training aids, or good putting training aid, that is. All right, so Tom M says, hi, Q. Thanks for these sessions. I love listening to other people's problems. Michael has a drill called Stab the Wall using an alignment stick and a club together. This seems to work on 100-yard shots and shorter, but as the swing gets faster, it seems this would inhibit the release. Is this, or does the release happen regardless because of the swing speed? So you're releasing the club no matter what. This is just a feel. So keep in mind, these stick drills are not made to make you so you don't release the club. You want to release the club, but they're made to help you, to give you a feeling of the proper release. Because if you're someone who's releasing the club early, which in my online lessons, I would say that's 80 to 90% of golfers in my online lessons are releasing the club early. If you're in that boat, the best way to move the needle and to make change is to exaggerate the issue, right? So if you're releasing the club early, what would be the way to exaggerate the issue? Well, it would be to not release the club at all, right? So if you have the feeling of the other stick release drill where you're keeping that stick away from you, it doesn't touch you, right? Or you're doing like what Michael's talking about, where you're stabbing the wall kind of behind you like this. Well, those drills are to exaggerate not releasing the club. And then if you get the right feeling for that, then what you can do is you can start to have that same feeling. And then if you see that you're actually doing this, right, where you're actually coming through and you're not releasing the club, then you can try to add a little bit of the release in. It's so much easier to overdo something than ease off of it than to try to just whittle away at it little by little by little. If you do it that way, a lot of times it doesn't change enough. I mean, if you could think, okay, I'm going to release this club out in front, then you would already be doing it, right? You would already have it fixed. So really, in order to change something, you have to exaggerate the opposite with it, all right? So those drills aren't to get you to not release the club at all. Sorry, I'm just moving around my camera here. They're intended to help you to feel what you need to feel in order to get the proper release. So we want you releasing the club, because if you don't release the club at all, then you're not going to get any speed. All right, so you want to release the club. Even on those 100-yard shots, you want to be releasing the club. All right, so let's keep going here. So since we don't have any questions, I got some good things, some cool things that I want to talk about that I think you guys might be interested in. All right, so what are adjustments you would make in your swing if you're not flexible? All right, so here's a couple things that I would do. So number one is I would flare the feet out. The reason for this is that if you're not flexible, then it's going to be very difficult to rotate your hips. And when you rotate your hips back, right, your trail hip is internally rotating. So your leg is doing this, right? So imagine if I set up pigeon-toed, how hard it would be to rotate, right? Well, if you're not flexible, that's kind of what it may feel like to an extreme extent. So if I turn my feet out, man, that just frees me up to rotate a little bit more. And you may be thinking, well, what about the lead leg? Isn't that going to hinder you with the lead leg? Well, with the lead leg, let's let this heel come off the ground, right? So if I flare my feet out and I pivot my hip back and I free up my heel to come off the ground, well, now I can get a good turn with my hips here. That's typically where it starts. It starts with the ground with the flexibility issues, and then it works up through the body. So flaring the feet out helps free up the feet and allows you to turn your hips more and your shoulders more, so that way you can create power. So that'd be number one, flare out the feet and let that heel come off the ground in the backswing. Now, what we can also do is we can set this foot back a little bit. That's going to do two things. One, it's going to help you to turn your back more away from the target. The more space and time you can create in your backswing, typically the more club head speed you can generate and the more distance you can generate, right? Because if you're not flexible, that's typically going to be a thing that you struggle with is distance, because you can't create that space without flexibility. So if we kind of cheat it a little bit by dropping this trail foot back, boy, that makes it a lot easier to kind of open things up. The other added benefit is that it makes it a heck of a lot easier to swing this club from the inside. If you're not flexible, it's hard to get this club to work behind you, which is what you need to do to get the club to swing from the inside. So if I have trouble getting this club to go behind me very much, right, then if I drop that trail foot back, that just makes it so much easier to swing the club from the inside and be able to hit a really strong kind of draw shot. Otherwise, if I set up, think of it in an extreme sense, right? If I set up with my body really open to the target and I can't get this club to go behind me very much, well, I'm going to swing over the top to the left and I'm going to hit the ball with a glancing blow, and I'm not going to be able to get very, very much compression on the ball. So we want to make sure that club is swinging nicely from the inside, so that way we can have control of the club head, because it's going to be trailing my hands. It's going to be the inside of my hands. This club gets on the outside of my hands. It's just, I'm going to have to make a bunch of compensations to get to where it's functional. Otherwise, I'm going to cut across it. So if I have this club behind my hands, man, that just makes it a heck of a lot easier to be consistent with your strike. So dropping that trail foot back has the benefits of getting your body to turn more away from the target, and also making it a heck of a lot easier to swing that club from the inside and to be able to hit stronger and consistent shots. Now, when you do that, it may be beneficial for you to also put the ball a little bit further back in your stance, right? So instead of having the ball really far forward, right, if you drop that foot back, it's going to be harder to get the club to the ball. So if you drop that foot back a little bit, I would put the ball, more toward the middle of the stance, or even a little bit back of the middle of the stance. And again, that's going to make it a lot easier to get to that ball and hit more solid shots. So those would be the things that I would recommend doing if you're not flexible, to really, really help you to play some consistent golf and to get some power at the same time. All right, so let's keep going here. So Tom M says, can you comment on what the feet should be doing in the swing? Example, on the start of the downswing, I feel like I'm pushing off my trail foot, but what should the front foot feel like? Are you pushing off the ground? Are you pushing off the front foot at any time during the swing? Oh, absolutely. So it sounds to me like the sequencing that you have with your feet is probably a little bit late. So what we want, our feet are a connection with the ground, right? And you may have heard of ground reaction forces. So ground reaction forces are essentially the forces that the ground pushes back into you. So they're in equal and opposite directions. So if I push down into the ground, it's going to push back up into me in the equal and opposite direction, right? So when I start my backswing, I want to be pushing into the ground in that direction, right? So even before my arms in the club move, I want to apply pressure into my trail foot in the backswing. This is a big mistake that I see a lot of people make, where They just start the swing by lifting up the club and with the arms and the hands. And when you do that, one, you're going to have a big loss of power, and two, your swing has already gotten off in the wrong sequence, and it's going to be hard to recover from there. So we want to drive into the ground, and then we want to have that pressure in the ground where we're pushing down and out kind of away from us. We want to have that pressure in the ground, and we want to be spiking that about in this area of the backswing. Depends on how long your swing is, but in this area of the backswing, a little more than halfway up, is where you want to start spiking that pressure. That's when the pressure on the trail foot is going to be the most. And you're going to be pushing toward your lead side when you do that, right? So I'm pushing as I get up to the top, I'm pushing toward my lead side. So as my back is turning into the target, I'm actually moving toward the target. A lot of you, this is going to be a very foreign feeling for you, but if we turn like this, right, and then we don't have any momentum going toward the target, and we start our arms down, which it sounds like that might be what you're doing, Tom. If I do that, then I'm going to tend to early release, flip, lose compression. A lot of times I'm going to come over the top because I'm starting the downswing with my upper body. So everything needs to start from the ground up. So I'm pushing into the ground to start my backswing. And then in this area, I'm pushing toward the target as my back is continuing to turn toward the target. I'm basically getting about 50-50 in my feet at the top of the swing, and then that pressure is going to increase in my lead foot as I come down into impact, right? So you can think of at address, you're about 50-50. You try to push into the ground before the club even starts, right? And then you spike it in here. So you're going to be about 75-80 in the trail foot here. At the top of the swing, you're going to be about 50-50 because you've moved some momentum toward your lead side. And then as you start your downswing, you're going to continue to push into the ground with that lead foot until you get to impact. And that pressure is also going to spike about lead arm parallel in the downswing. That's typically when you're going to be pushing the most in that lead foot. And then it's going to kind of coast as the club kind of, is working down into the ball. You're still pushing into the ground, but it's not as much as it was right here. And you're going to have about 75-80% pressure in the foot here. And then you're going to come all the way around into the full finish. And you're going to have 90-95% pressure in the lead foot in the full finish. So William N says, I'm pretty flexible, but I'm pigeon-toed, had a hip replacement right October 2020. I'm back to full strength, but have a tendency to hang back on the right side. What can I do to get back and through my left side? This happens primarily with the driver. So, William, exactly what I just talked about. So you're probably loading late into the trail foot, and then you're not loading into the lead foot soon enough. Or what I see, what you're describing, what it looks like to me, or what it sounds like to me, is you start your backswing, and then you're loading on that trail foot even as you're starting the downswing. Right. And if you start the downswing before you've transferred any pressure to that lead foot, then you're going to tend to hang back. Right. You could also be swinging over the top. If you swing over the top, you will tend to hang back in the swing in order to hit a functional shot. Right. And the reason for that is if I swing over the top, my club is going to bottom out more toward the target. So if I shift my weight to my lead foot and I swing over the top, well, I probably won't even be able to hit the golf ball. So what a lot of people do is they'll swing over the top, but then they'll hang back on the back foot. So that way they can hit the golf ball. So those would be the two things that I'd be looking at. If you are an over the top swinger, what I'd recommend is the Never Slice Again course. And then if you are someone that, is just having trouble getting getting to the lead side, I'd recommend the Stop Chunking and Topping course. That course has some great drills in there to help you get to your lead side. So both of these courses are included with your membership. All you have to do to get to them is click the house icon at the top of the page. That will take you to the homepage. And on the homepage there's a list of all the courses. If you scroll down, select which course applies to you. You may have to get out the video camera and video your swing to see exactly what's going on there. But that's what I would recommend doing. All right. So again, since we don't have any questions, I will go over something that I think you guys might find interesting. So Does it matter if I use a strong grip, weak, or neutral grip? So it does definitely matter, but you can play good golf with either one of them. So for those of you who aren't familiar, let's go over what exactly that means to have a strong, weak, or neutral grip. So the easiest way to think about it is to imagine the top of the grip, that's 12 o'clock. And then the side of the grip, that would be 3 o'clock for a right-handed golfer. So noon, 12 o'clock is on top, and then 3 o'clock is on the side. If you have a weak grip, right? So someone like Colin Morikawa, for example, has a weak grip. Your thumbs are basically placed, especially your leading thumb, your lead hand thumb is placed on top of the grip. So if I have the leading edge straight up like this, my thumbs would be directly on top of the grip. That would be considered a weak grip. A strong grip would be one that would be more toward 3 o'clock, where it's more on the side of the grip, right? So I would say anything that's 2 to 3 o'clock, I would consider that a strong grip. Paul Easinger had a really strong grip. There's lots of players that have strong grips and they're successful as well. A neutral grip would be in between there. So I would say 1:30 on the clock. If the clock is the club here, with 3 o'clock being the side, noon being the top, 1:30-ish, that would be more like a neutral grip. So Adam Scott, Tiger Woods, they have more neutral grips. So, what's better? What should you use? So generally, I would say most players are going to be better off having a neutral to strong grip. The reason for that is that most players struggle with coming down steep and getting the face closed. Most players struggle with that. So if you have a stronger grip, it's so much easier to swing the club from the inside and get the club face closed, right? So if I have a really strong grip, I have my thumb on the side and have that leading edge up, I can turn that handle down a lot more. And if I have this face more closed, I'm going to tend to want to swing more to the right. But if I have a really weak grip, it's harder for me I can't turn that down as much, right? So I'm going to tend to swing to the left, right, over the top a little bit and steep to be able to hit a functional shot, right? Because I can have an open face and hit the ball on target if I swing to the left a little bit, right? Because swinging to the left essentially kind of closes the face a little bit. So what I would say is it's very dependent on the player, but you can play good golf with any of them. But I tell you what, I'm changing more grips to stronger grips than I am weaker grips. It's pretty rare that I would have someone go weaker with their grip. It's much more common that I have someone go stronger with their grip because it's just a lot easier to swing typically for most players when you do that. So the other thing to think about is that if you have a really weak grip, right? So I have my thumb on top. If I'm going to get shaft lean at impact and I'm going to square up the face, I'm going to have a lot of bow in my lead wrist. I'm going to have to look like this at impact. This is a very difficult position for most players to get into. Not that it can't be done. The best ball striker in the world right now, Colin Morikawa, very weak grip. Look at him at impact. He looks like this at impact, right? Very difficult position for most players to get into, though. So generally, I recommend if you have a stronger grip to get shaft lean at impact. So if I sit up in a stronger grip here and I get shaft lean at impact, right? My lead wrist, I don't have to have it crazy bowed. And it might appear that it's cupped right here. It's not. If you look at it from this angle, it's flat to just slightly bowed. But I tell you what, it's a heck of a lot easier to get into this position right here for most people than it is to get into that position. So just some things to consider when you're thinking about how strong or weak your grip is. So I would say if you're someone who struggles with slices, pulls, getting that club to shallow out, from the inside, you're struggling with correct spine angles and things like that, you probably ought to go more toward a stronger grip. And if you're someone who swings the club too far from the inside, right, you snap hook shots, you get the ball started, you overdraw shots a lot because the face is getting too close, you may want to consider weakening the grip. If you were able to easily get in those bowed wrist positions at impact, like a Colin Morikawa, like a Ben Hogan, for example, then weakening that grip may be the way to go. But again, I don't change a lot. I don't really make people weaken their grips very often. So I get a lot of people tell me that changing the grip is a very difficult thing. It can be very awkward at first, but it's actually one of the easiest things to train because you don't have to be at the driving range or the golf course to do it. So the way to more very easily train your grip would be to just have a club around the house and just practice taking a stronger or a weaker grip, depending on which one. If you're looking to change it, and just take the grip, take a swing, right, and then regrip it again. Kind of go through the routine over and over again. I tell you what, you do that for 10, 15 minutes a day for a couple weeks. Super easy. It's one of the easiest things to change. So if you need to change your grip, that's the way I would go about it. But you may not need to. You may already have a proper grip, but most of you probably need to possibly strengthen your grip. All right, so let's keep going. All right, so Jerry B says, what was the name of the putting aid you referenced yesterday? Forgot the website address. So it's Back to Basics, I'm guessing is the one that you're talking about. I actually talked about it earlier. You may have missed it, Jerry, but it's this guy. It's Back to Basics, so it's the number 2, not the letter 2. I don't know if you can see that. Back to Basics. It's probably backwards. But yeah, it's Back to Basics Golf. I don't know what the website is. Again, I don't have any affiliation. I'm just a happy customer. So if you want to check it out, just do a Google search for Back to Basics Golf, and you should find it. I think they're pretty reasonable too. I think it might have been $50. I can't remember exactly how much it was. It comes in some nice packaging. Comes with a sleeve. Has some the little gates that you can hit the ball through on the green. Comes with some drills on paper to do with. I think it's just a good product. All right. So Willis says, should you pull into impact with the left side or hit into impact with the right side? Both. You're doing both. So what's happening in the golf swing with the trail side is very much like a right arm throw, right? So if I'm a submarine pitcher, if I'm skipping a rock across the water, my right side is doing that, right? So I'm coming in, I'm throwing it, I'm releasing it out in front. The lead side is very much like throwing a frisbee. So if I were to take my hat here and throw it like a frisbee, I'm turning my back and I'm letting it go out in front. So it's both. You're pulling and pushing with the trail side. Now, what you may need to feel are two different things, right? But that's actually what should be happening in the golf swing. So you may want to play around with feels. You know, if you feel more like the sidearm throw or the lead hand pull through, right? You know, those are feels, good feels depending on what's going on in your swing. But what's going on is you're using both. So Mike S says, talk about points I need to consider if I'm using a 10-finger grip. If you're using a 10-finger grip, that's completely fine. I would just, all the grips are basically the same. A proper grip, they're all the same. It doesn't matter whether you use, it's really personal preference, whether you use interlock, overlap, or a 10-finger grip. It's completely personal preference. If you're using a 10-finger grip and you're holding it like a baseball bat, I wouldn't recommend that. I recommend having the thumbs kind of going down the shaft, right? Kind of like this instead of this, right? So having the thumbs go down the shaft, but you can do that in a 10-finger grip as well. So I'd make sure your hands are close together, right? You don't want your hands separated. Have your hands close together. Have the thumbs running down the shaft, and use like a conventional grip. So if you have the base below the base of the pointer and above the base of the pinky, that's where you want the club going through. Take the grip, have the thumb close to the hands. That way there's no security issues, right? We don't want it too much in the fingers because then we get the long thumb, and we don't want it not too much in the hand because then we can't hinge the club properly. So we want it above the base of the pointer, below the base of the pinky. That puts it a little bit in the fingers, a little bit in the hand. Wrap the club around, or wrap the fingers around. And then with the trail hand, again, you can just have your fingers together. You can use overlap, interlock, or 10-finger. It's up to you. And your thumb, your hand is going to the lifeline of your hand, which is the crease that's between the two meaty parts of your hand here. So you have the thumb pad and the heel pad, right? There's a crease right there. That's going to go right on top of or on the side of the thumb, right? And if you do that, there's your 10-finger grip. That's really the only thing you need to do. So 10-finger grip, if you have the strength, then I recommend a interlock or an overlap grip, because it just, for unity wise with your hands, helps your hands work together a little bit better. But if you have maybe weak hands, or maybe you have arthritis, or you're just not really strong and you want to get some more speed, it can help you to do a 10-finger grip, because it just allows you to put more force into the handle. So if that's the case, then that's when I would consider a 10-finger grip. So a lot of times juniors will start out with a 10-finger grip. If you get older and you've lost some hand strength and things like that, you may look toward a 10-finger grip. There's lots of reasons to do it, but yeah, that's what I'd be looking at. If you have any specific questions, I'll be happy to help. But those would be what I'd be looking into. All right, so Robert K says, I get the feeling doing the stab the wall drill, the get to the finish club perpendicular to the target and over my head much faster. However, my club head speed is no faster at the bottom. Is it the forward club angle and resulting ball compression that will make the ball go further? Yes. So you're, releasing the club. If you're someone who's casting at the top, right, and then you're coming in like that, then if you start getting some lag and then releasing the club out more in front, you'll typically get more speed. But if you're not really changing this area, right, and the club's kind of getting to the ball in the same amount of time, it's not necessarily going to get you more speed, but it should get you more compression by virtue of more shaft length. So yeah, and more compression typically leads to more distance. So yes, the distance is more than likely going to come from the de-lofting. It's more than likely not going to increase the speed. It doesn't always increase the speed necessarily. So Jerry B says, thanks, no problem, Jerry. All right, so JY says, I'm across the line at the top of my swing, which makes it hard to shallow the club. I eventually shallow it, but it is late and I believe inconsistent. Any drills for keeping myself from getting across the line at the top? Yeah, I would focus on your trail arm movement. So when we go across the line at the top, typically the elbow is doing what's called externally rotating, right? Or excuse me, internally rotating. I mixed that up. Internally rotating. So basically your elbow's like winning an arm wrestling contest. And a lot of times this trail forearm will pronate. So that's inward rotation. And then this trail wrist sometimes will also will tend to go in extension, right? So if I go crazy with all of those, I can get crazy across the line at the top, right? So I'm maxing out my internal rotation. I'm maxing out the pronation, and I'm really extending my wrist. So I can go crazy across the line if I do that. Now, odds are you're not that far across the line, but yeah. So I would be looking at those things. I'd be looking at getting your elbow more in, working in the transition more into internal rotation, right? I keep saying that wrong. You want it to be working into external rotation. So losing an arm wrestling contest. So when you go up to the top, I'd feel like in the transition, as you're getting up to the top, it's almost like you'd be throwing something behind you, right? So if you were to take a ball and kind of throw it behind you, that's the feeling that you want to have, right? That you're throwing a ball behind you when you go up to the top. That's going to allow that. And then I would feel like you are rotating your forearm outward, which is called supination. Right. So if I go like this, turn my palm up to the sky, that's supination, right? So if you do that, right, that will get the club more laid off, right? And then if I extend my wrist back, right? If I extend my wrist back, that can also, right? So if I flex my wrist forward, extend my wrist back, that can also change that, right? So those would be the three things that I'd be looking at in your swing to see, okay, Which one of those things is making me do that? The other option would be to have a longer swing. If you have a longer swing, you can afford to be more across the line because you have more time to get it to shallow out, right? So if I'm like John Daly and I'm like this, right? Well, I have more time to get that club in position if I have a longer swing. But if I have a shorter swing and I'm like this, well, I just don't have any time to get that club, where I need it to be. So that's what I'll be looking at. And usually the lead wrist as well. If this trail wrist is doing that, right? If my trail wrist is going into flexion, then my lead wrist is typically going to extend back. So focusing on that lead wrist may also help. But I would feel it's typically more of a trail arm move. And the reason why a lot of people do that is because, especially when you have a shorter swing, because I'm guessing that you do. If you have a shorter swing, then this gets the club to travel more. So if I go across the line, the club travels more, so it feels like it's more powerful. It feels more powerful than this, right? So one thing I would recommend doing as well is go look at Jon Rahm's swing. So Jon Rahm is a shorter swing, right? He gets a 90-degree turn, but he doesn't really elevate the arms a ton. He doesn't turn his shoulders as much as like a Dustin Johnson. Obviously, it works really well for him, but if you have a shorter swing, you need to be in closer to inline or laid off position. Otherwise, you're going to really have trouble shallowing out the club, right? If you're right here, man, that's just going to be difficult in such a small amount of time to be able to do that. It just doesn't work that way. So typically, you're better off being in a position that's more in line with the hands or even laid off a little bit. But you want to make sure that the club's working in that direction. When you get the club laid off, you got to make sure that it's continuing to work into a more laid off position in the downswing. Because a lot of times when people get the club like this, what they'll do is they'll do that and they'll steepen it. So be careful with that. Make sure that when you get up to the top here, that it's continuing to move in that direction. Go look at Jon Rahm's swing and you'll see what I'm talking about there. Go to YouTube, Google, or go to YouTube and search Jon Rahm down the line video, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. He gets it in here, and then he lays it down and pivots through. Whereas if you get it here, right, you got to make sure not to resist the urge to do this, because that's going to just throw the club out, and that's just a different issue you don't want. So you work really hard to get it laid off, but then you do that with it. You want to make sure you're not doing that. All right, so 20 minutes or so left. Keep the questions coming. JY says good stuff. Thanks, no problem. So Robert K says, different Robert K. Driving best of my life, but facing 40 to 70 yard pitches from fairways, firm, sand wedge 80. So all these less. Better to hit these short wedges by swinging slower or shortening backswing and staying aggressive with acceleration. So there's lots of ways to do it, but generally it's best to have the same rhythm and tempo and just change the length of the swing, right? So and that will, because the more space and time you have, the more speed you're going to generate. Because if you have the same rhythm and tempo, then it's going to be faster if it's a longer swing, right? So imagine if in an extreme sense, this would be the same rhythm and tempo, right, as this. Right. Well, the longer swing is probably going to create more, more speed because I created more space there. That's generally the best way to do it. So that's what I would be looking at doing. A good way to kind of get a feel for that is using a clock system. So what that is, and Clay goes over this in the Top Speed Golf wedge system, but a clock system is in reference to typically your lead arm, and like it's a hand on a clock, right? So if I bring my lead arm to here, that's a 7:30 swing, right? If I bring my lead arm to here and swing down from there, it's a 9 o'clock swing. If I bring my lead arm to there, it'd be a 10:30 swing. So what you can do is you can see, carry that same rhythm and tempo with all your swings, and you can see, okay, how far does the 7:30 swing go with my sand wedge, right? How far does a 9 o'clock swing go? How far does a 10:30 swing go? And then what you can do, and this is the way that I like to fill in the gaps with my wedges, is I like to choke up on it, right? So if you choke up on it, that makes the lever arm shorter, which makes the speed slower, which means that you won't hit it as far, right? So if you choke up on it, it takes a little bit off. So then you can do the same thing. You can see how far a 10:30 or 7:30, 9 o'clock, and 10:30 swings go. So let's say I have a 50-yard wedge shot, right? Well, I know that a choked up 1-inch sand wedge goes 60 yards with a 9 o'clock swing. So what I can do is I can just take a little bit off of that, right? I just swing a little bit short of 9 o'clock, right? And that will get me really, really close to that 50 number that I'm looking for. So that's what I'd be trying to do. So to get to the you can actually search that on the website, clock system. We also have the Top Speed Golf wedge system. I recommend that for sure. But the clock system, if you just want to search that, in the upper right hand corner, there is a search box. So you can search that. And then you can, search that in the upper right hand corner, and then you can watch the video. If you're on a mobile device, if you're on a mobile device, you can still search things on the website. It just takes a little bit of finding the search box. So if you click the hamburger icon in the upper right hand corner, which is 3 horizontal lines, they call it a hamburger icon. If you select that, that will expand a menu. Then if you scroll down that menu, you'll find at the bottom there, you'll find the search box, search clock system, and you'll find the video I'm talking about. So Semk says, on the downswing, is the initial feeling of the left hand a pulling through the center line of the shaft feeling? Pulling through the center line of the shaft feeling. It really depends on where you're at the top of the swing, right? And the direction that you're pulling. So if I'm like this at the top of the swing, right? If I have a very vertical swing, if I were to just pull straight down, well, that's not going to be good, right? That's not going to be a good position, right? If I'm really flat like this, right, and I pull toward the golf ball, well, that's probably going to put me in a good position. So it really just depends on what's going on at the top. Not everyone's going to start the downswing in the same way, depending on where they are at the top, depending on how the club is moving at the top, because that transition is one of the most important things in the golf swing. So, when I'm saying the transition, I'm referring to the moment that's between your backswing and the downswing. So those moments that are around when the club switches directions, right? So if ideally we would want this club to start to work behind the hands, right? Get this club kind of working behind the hands. So that way you can, that's shallowing out the club, and you can kind of turn through the ball. If this club starts to work out ahead of the hands, right? If it's working in that direction in the transition, it's just so difficult to be consistent from there, because you're going to tend to either swing way over the top, chop down into it, very difficult to hit a functional shot from there, or you're going to tend to make some sort of move in the downswing to make up for that bad positioning of the club, like standing up, early release, and things like that. So I wish I could tell you, yeah, that's exactly what you need to feel in your swing, but there's just no way for me to know without seeing your swing. So what I would say is golf is a game of adjusting your feel to get the desired result that you want, right? So if you look at the top of the swing and you're feeling something that's getting you to move that club in the way that's better, then I would say that feeling is correct. Even though if you literally did that feeling, it would be wrong. But that's why I say feel isn't always real, and golf is a game of adjusting your feel to get the desired result that you want. So maybe you might be feeling something, but that's not the reality of what you're doing either. So that's what you have to look at. I wish I could answer your question but it may not necessarily be. I don't really understand what you mean by the center line of the shaft. I don't really know what you mean by that. And you put it in quotes, so it must mean something. Maybe it's somebody else's ideology, and it'd probably be a better question for them, but I don't know. So DG Robinson TPT, excuse me, says, if I'm understanding correctly, the rotation of the forearms through release creates the greatest amount of speed, but some inconsistency because of the rapid rate of face rotation, making the release more of an extension flexion action of the wrist, like waving bye-bye creates more consistency, but maybe less speed. As I'm thinking correctly, or do I need your expert advice? So, you get more speed from more face rotation, but more face rotation does typically lead to, greater degrees of dispersion, right? So, kind of have to find that happy mix that works best for you, because you think about it this way: it's the club going through the impact zone like this versus this. If it was spinning around, right? So if it's spinning around, you're getting some added speed from that. If it's not spinning around, then you're not getting added speed from it, right? But if it's spinning around, right? If it's doing this, then it's going to be more difficult to time that up, right? But there's lots of players out there that play really well with, they call it ROC, rate of closure. There's lots of players that play well with high rates of closure, and there's lots of players that play with low rates of closure, and everything in between. So yeah, you gotta pick your battles, basically. But that's a higher up concept too. I wouldn't, unless you are nailing the top speed golf system and the move, right? That's probably the last thing that you should be thinking about, because it doesn't really fall into the 80-20. Which, if you're not familiar with what that means, 80-20, basically it's from the Pareto principle, which means that you're going to get most of your results from a small amount of things, right? So 80% of your results are going to come from 20% of, of things that you can do. So the top speed golf system is that 80-20. The move is part of that 80-20. I would say that the worrying about your face rotation and things like that, and trying to get that to be smaller or bigger, falls into the smaller amount of things that can make you better. So Tom S says, Q, when you shift pressure into the lead leg, in what part of the foot should you feel the pressure? How should the pressure move as you complete the swing? So yeah, it's going to initially typically move into the balls of the lead foot. And then as you come down, and then it's going to quickly move to the heel as you come through impact, right? So as I'm going up the top here, right, especially if you're lifting your heel off the ground to get a bigger turn, right? You're shifting your weight to your lead side. It's in the ball of the feet initially, and then it quickly moves into the heel as you come through contact. All right, so we got about 10 minutes left if we got any more questions. All right, since we don't have any questions, I'll talk about a topic that I think is interesting and you guys might find interesting. So, have drivers actually got longer? So, the faces on drivers have not really gotten any hotter, right? So, the USGA has put rules into place for the faces of drivers that don't allow them to be any hotter. They did that, I think it was back in 2003. So you're talking about almost the last 20 years, they haven't been able to make the faces any hotter. So if you hit a ball in the center of the face, that ball is not going to be coming off of there any faster than it was in 2003. So in that sense, no, they have not gotten longer, but they have done things that have been able to make them longer from a dynamic standpoint. So one of those things would be the center of gravity. So they've figured out, and it's actually been quite a while that they figured it out, but they figured out how to weight the clubs in a way that gives you the highest launch and the best spin numbers to help the ball go farther. So ball speed wise, it's not making it longer from how hot the face is, but by launch characteristics of getting a higher launch, lower spin, they've gotten those to where they're a lot better, and a lot of that is specific to the golfer as well. So if you're struggling with distance, and you've never been fitted for a driver, you certainly could get more distance by getting a new driver and finding what proper weighted clubs work best for you. And not only that, if you get fitted, you're going to get the right length of shaft, the right flex of shaft, the right kick point of the shaft, that it combined with the proper head, with the correct weighting in it, that gives you the most distance and most consistent ball flight. So if you've never been fitted for a driver, highly recommend you go get fitted for a driver, because all of those things can be optimized pretty well. So in that sense, yes, the drivers have gotten longer because they've gotten those numbers to be, or they've gotten those weights and those things in the shaft and the things better to allow you to get more distance. But really, there haven't been any breakthroughs on that in quite a while. It really becomes dependent on the golfer on what is best at that point. So what I will say is that you've seen a lot of these drivers, they've taken a lot of weight out of the top, because to change the center of gravity of the driver to make it to where it's higher launch, low spinning, you want to take that weight and move it back and away from the face as much as you can. So in order to get more weight back and away from the face as much as you can, you want to take some weight away from the top of the driver. So a lot of these companies, you've seen that the material that's on the top part of the driver, it's like paper thin. It's very, very thin, or it's very, very lightweight, thin material typically on the top of that driver. So you definitely want to be careful with the top of your driver, because they're definitely much more fragile than they used to be. You take an old Callaway Big Bertha driver, the top of it is more robust. You take a newer Callaway driver, a lot of them, they have the kind of the carbon fiber looking on the top. It's much more, the sound's a lot different because it's way thinner on top there, because they've taken the weight out of the top and put it back to allow the launch to be better. The other thing that they've done with the weighting is they've increased the MOI of the driver. So what that means is the resistance to twisting. So when you hit a ball on the toe, right, it's going to tend to twist the face. But if you have more weighting, if it's weighted in a way more toward the perimeter, then it reduces that amount of twisting, which allows you to transfer more energy to the golf ball. But this only really applies on off-center strikes. So your best drive is going to go the same distance, right? For a low MOI driver versus high MOI driver, if you're hitting it in the center of the face. But those off-center strikes will go farther for a higher MOI driver because it's transferring more of that ball speed. So the answer to the question is kind of yes and no. The faces are not any hotter. In the last 20 years or so, they can't make the faces, the trampoline effect on the face, they can't make it any hotter, but they have improved the weighting of the clubs. And again, that's dependent more on the player that will allow a specific player to hit it farther. They've taken weight out of the top of the head and be able to move. The technology's come a long way in the fact that they've been able to remove weight from other parts of the club where it's not necessary, to put it strategically in other places that allow you to get a better launch and spin, which does help you to get more distance. And then also the MOI. So at the end of the day, should you get a new driver to get more distance? Well, it depends on some factors. So number one would be, well, how old is your current driver? If you have a driver from the 90s, odds are you could definitely gain some distance from getting a new driver, because all those factors are going to be better, right? If you've never been fit before for a driver, certainly could be could be weight. Even if you just got a new driver, getting fitted for a new driver, you've never been fitted before, or you haven't been fitted in 20 years or something like that, could certainly have its benefits. If you were fit for a driver last year, and your favorite driver company that whoever it might be came out with a new driver, odds are it's not really going to be that much different than what you have now. And then it comes down to, okay, this driver might be 1 or 2 yards longer on average because they figured out a way to just marginally change the weights a little bit more in my favor, or they found a way to raise the MOI just a little bit more, without affecting the launch and spin numbers too much. If that extra 1 or 2, maybe 3 yards is worth it to you for $500, $600, $700, whatever it might be, then that's on you to decide if that's worth it to you. But generally, the drivers aren't going to be that much longer depending on what you had before. But that's basically my opinion on that. All right, so let's see if we got any new questions. So Tom K says, following up to the last question, why should the weight shift to the lead to the heel of the lead foot? Because it's very difficult to rotate your body if you're not driving into the heel, right? If you don't drive this way, because if you're up on your toes, you're typically not going to be able to straighten out your leg. It's hard to straighten out your leg and be up on your toes and push your hip back and around. Imagine if you were like kicking something with as much pressure as possible, right? Are you going to kick with your toes like this, or are you going to kick it like that, right? You're going to be able to apply much more pressure with the heel rolling into the heel of your foot than you are with your toes. The other thing is when you get out on your toes, your hips typically move forward, and it's not going to allow you to rotate. Whereas if you drive in your heels, you can drive your hips back and around, right? So that's why it moves into the heel. What you can do is you can go look at the footwork of tour players. Go on YouTube, look at your favorite tour players' golf swings. You will see very few. I don't know if you'll see any that actually drive into the toes through impact. I don't see any tour players who go like this through impact. Now, there are some players that end up on their toes as they're coming through impact, and the reason for that is because they drove so much into the heel that they actually become airborne. So they get here, they drive into the heel, because remember that max pressure is happening right in this area, lead arm parallel to the ground. And they drove so much in the heel that they actually become airborne through contact. So an example of that would be Justin Thomas. Justin Thomas, especially when he's really trying to hit one hard, he'll come down, he'll go into the toes first, and then he'll drive into the heel. And then as he's driving into the heel so hard, and he's not real heavy, right? So he's easy to force himself off the ground, and he'll kind of get that floating foot, right? You'll see that sometimes from guys where they get that floating foot. Well, they don't get that floating foot from only pushing in the toes. It's toe, heel, then the foot floats, right? Or the foot comes off the ground. That's typically what's happening there. But yeah, go look at the footwork. Go look at you'll see what I'm saying. If you look at slow motion swings, you'll see what I'm saying there. All right. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a good rest of your day, and I will talk to you next time.